Now, would you like to learn what everyday people in Czechoslovakia used to drive? Perhaps what the average car at the time looked like, what they were equipped with, and what Czechoslovakian car manufacturers and brands were doing behind their own curtain. How well were they doing? What were people able to buy, and then were the people even allowed to buy these cars? So join me and let's learn together. Now, we'll start this video off by talking about how attainable these cars actually were back in the day, what hurdles people had to jump in order to get these cars, and where ordinary people are even allowed to own these cars and what they had to do to be able to own these cars. Now look, it turns out that after 1948 and the revolution of 1948, when the communists have taken over the leadership of Czechoslovakia, pretty much getting hold of any sort of item, including cars and including any sort of items from the West and foreign items, foreign products, was incredibly difficult, and people have had to jump some crazy hurdles in order to essentially be able to get these things, even be able to allow to spend their hard work money on these items. Now, in order for any working class ordinary person to be able to actually even buy a car, to be allowed to buy a car, they had to go to the local jurisdiction in their city or town, and they had to apply for potvrdenie vydané spotrebiteľom podľa ich pracovných zásluh na budovaní socializmu, which is basically like an approval by the system that a person either had to require a car to be able to carry out their job, because obviously socialism all was built up on everyone having a job and everyone contributed to the system, or the person had to have already contributed enough to building up the socialist system in Czechoslovakia and essentially adding more into it to be able to have a car as a reward, essentially, which I find ridiculous, because it's almost like kids in primary school and rewarding kids in primary school with sweets for good behaviour. Basically, unless you are either a doctor or a surgeon or a dentist or doing any sort of essential work, Gustav Husak would just give you the big no-no and say you can't have a car unless it's necessary for your work or unless you've contributed to his socialist party. So yeah, I find this very ridiculous. And it's not even like people got these cars for free, by the way. It's not like surgeons and dentists and, you know, policemen have got these cars for free. They still had to pay for it for their hard-earned money, which at the time was a hell of a lot of money for people to be able to buy cars, because the production numbers were so low and it was so limited. And even the actual raw materials were imported from Soviet Union, and even the local ones were actually really limited. For example, the different types of metals, etc. So yeah, people still had to pay their own hard-earned cash. Now, starting from the early 1950s, Mototechno
Do pražské Mototechny přišla nedávno větší zásilka lidových vozů zahraniční výroby.
Was basically like a local garage, and the main and only garage which had its own legislative deciding which people were allowed to buy cars and which people weren't allowed to buy cars. And so the production at the time, especially in the 1950s, was so low that only a very limited amount of cars was even made and sold to the general public in Czechoslovakia. And so in 1953, only 3,800 cars were actually sold across all of Czechoslovakia. Now, this is very interesting and very dystopian, and something that even my mum would have told me a lot about. So in order for people to buy any foreign products or even the local products, including cars with the highest specifications, they had to go to these shops called Tuzex. Now, in these Tuzex shops, which mainly held foreign products, people weren't actually able to buy items with actual money. They had to have these points system called Bony. And with these Bony, you will then be able to buy these products. Now, Bony weren't so easily accessible, and people were essentially rewarded Bony or had to trade their money for less of Bony. And to me, this sounds like a video game, and as you can imagine, this was incredibly popular amongst the party members, the Communist Party members, because essentially they would just make up whatever amount of Bony they wanted, and they would just pop into these shops like, you know, just getting free candy essentially, and they were definitely abusing their power and abusing the system by just being able to then purchase anything, and an ordinary average person had to really grind and work hard to get these Bony. Later in the 1960s, as the production of local cars, Škoda and Tatra has ramped up a little bit, and more cars have been actually made and sold to the market. The point system was scrapped, the Bony system was scrapped, and people no longer had to have Bony and had to have this permission to be able to own cars. People, ordinary people like myself, were actually able to write their name down on a really massive long list and essentially wait for a long time, even sometimes up to years, and queuing up overnight sometimes outside of these Mototechno garages which were selling cars. Now look, we're going to mention different cars and different brands in this video. However, as any Czech or any Slovak can back me up in the comments, Our domestic market and our history has really been dominated by one specific brand, and still is to this day, and that is Škoda, or Škoda as we call it. And so in this video we're going to specifically cover Škoda a little bit more, but we're also going to cover other brands. And if you would like to see a deep dive video specifically on the history of Škoda, let me know in the comment section below. I've also put out a little poll onto the post on the channel, so go and vote on there and let me know which sort of topics and videos you would like to see next. Now look, as you can imagine, the cars that actually had the highest interior specification, for example, the largest, most powerful engines, and the best equipment were reserved specifically for Communist Party members, country representatives, or Verejná bezpečnost, which was actually the name of the police at the time, meaning public security, Verejná bezpečnost. Now, some of these cars, which I'll show on the screen right now, including V8 Volgas, including Ladas with a top specification, which at the time were incredibly luxury cars compared to the Spartan Škoda 100, which average people were able to drive, and including my personal favourite, one of my favourite, Tatra 603. Imagine being at a rave and one of these Tatra 603 with a little light and a spotlight of a tram pulling up and people running away because they knew what was coming with the beatings of Verejná bezpečnost, essentially, because times were a lot rougher back then from the stories I've been told, and these illegal raves were getting shut down pretty hardcore, not like nowadays being very diplomatic as the police would be. Back then people were getting beaten left, right and centre for starting these illegal raves and for listening too much of Western music, essentially, which is another video that I can cover. You've got to admit, the Tatra 603 is an incredibly beautiful and menacing car. And just to tell you a little bit about it, it was rear engine, rear wheel drive, and it was also a V8, a massive V8 as well. And apparently it was a very good drive, very luxury on the inside, and this car was incredibly inaccessible to people at the time when it was first built. As you can imagine, ordinary people in Czechoslovakia only own cars made by the Eastern Bloc countries, because only those were approved by the communist system. They couldn't import loads of Western cars like BMWs and Mercedes of the time and sell them to everyday ordinary people. Now, according to my data, back in the 1970s, the most dominant car brand, of course, was Škoda. And they even had up to 30 or 40% of the market share at the time, because obviously that was the domestic car brand. And a lot of investment went into that to be able to basically be the main car brand of Czechoslovakia. And actually it still is to this day, because only up in 2022, Škoda as a car manufacturer in its share of car sales of the market was overtaken by a Hyundai, which is absolutely incredible, because if you look at it, that's nearly 80 years of domination of Czech and Slovakian markets by Škoda. Now, this 100/110 was basically a spiritual successor to the Škoda MB, the legendary MB, also nicknamed MBčka by the Czechs and Slovaks at the time. MB has actually celebrated its 60th anniversary last year when I was in Mladá Boleslav Škoda Museum, which I'll put some pictures on the screen right now if I can find them in my phone. And yeah, absolutely beautiful car. They've actually had a MBX version, which was a two-door coupe with pillarless windows which went all the way down, creating essentially like a void all the way through, with having no actual physical A pillars or B pillars. And absolutely incredible car. And it was also rear engine, rear wheel drive, two-seater coupe, which is another little trend which we will see in this video with Škoda. Now look, the interiors of these were extremely crude, and they didn't even have a cassette tape player, which was obviously in the higher specs, which was specifically reserved for either the party members or specific representative of the state. Ordinary average people were very lucky if they got a radio and a heater in their car, and they were grateful for that at the time. Importantly, there was also a two-door coupe, which I'll show you on the screen right now, and the Czechs and the Slovakians in the comments will be able to tell that these were incredibly highly sought after, and these were basically the favourites of these 100/110 generation Škodas, because they look sporty, they were two-door coupes, and as you'll see in this little passage that I've got following this, they were actually very successful in motorsport on the worldwide stage. The 130 Aros was highly regarded as one of the most legendary Škodas, motorsport Škodas of the time, and even to this day it's an absolute legend, and most of Czechs and Slovakians who appreciate cars will be able to tell you this car and what it did, and which I will tell you right now. So the car has actually managed to win a 1981 European Touring Car Championship, as well as a 1977 Monte Carlo World Rally Stage, as well as many other European races and rally stages. And incredibly beautiful car to even look at, in my opinion, and to hear. And I will include some clips in this video. I went to Mladá Boleslav Škoda Museum last year when I was obviously in Czechia, and I saw it in person, and what a beautiful car. I mean, I think at the time, with what they had to work with in terms of limited raw materials, limited engine sizes, and limited engineering power and knowledge, I think they were able to build an absolute beast of 142 horsepower at the time, weighing only 700 kilos in the early 1970s. Was a, and it's something to behold, I think. Now look, of course, there were many other manufacturers and many other brands and cars available to general public at the time, which we're going to also cover and look at right now. It wasn't just Škodas, it was also these. Now here we got Dacia 1300, which was actually based on a Renault 12T, which Romanians have bought the designs and pads for. Yes, they bought the pads for, not steel, alright? Very unique. I'm only joking, I love you all Romanians. If you're watching, shout out to all the Romanians, alright? We've got another beauty, Moskvich 408. This was another widely popular car in the CSSR, which is Československá socialistická republika, meaning Czechoslovakian Socialist Republic. Based on an Opel Kadett from the west, regarded highly as indestructible. And actually, my granddad, my mum's dad obviously, that's how it works I believe, he used to have one of these Moskviches, and I've heard a hell of a lot of stories as they were very capable on icy roads, and they were actually able to surpass hell of a lot of buses and other cars at the time on these roads, because maybe of their weight or of their drivetrain layout. Polski Fiat, the Maluch, aka the little car basically. Maluch is like a little nickname for a small car, because Mali means small, and yeah, well, you go figure. Anyway, there was another very popular car at the time. Rear engine, rear wheel drive, very cheap and accessible to ordinary people at the time. Now Warburg and Trabant, which were Deutsche Democratic Republic, which was the East German name essentially, they were cooking up something as well, right? They were not a stranger to making cars, and this is what they were making, which essentially Trabant and Warburg are like a two-stroke motorcycle engine cars with like a steering wheel mounted gear shift, manual of course as well, which I actually luckily got to see in Germany when I was there a few years ago. I lived in Stuttgart, and there was not too far from Stuttgart, there was like an East German retro car Trabant and mainly Warburg meetup, and these are still very popular in Germany right now. People are very fond of them and people really like them, and by the way, they only came up with about 16 horsepower I believe, so yeah, not fast at all, and it did take ages to climb a hill, and I was in one of them, and I can show you some videos on the screen if I can find them. It's very funny, and but also very enjoyable and nostalgic. And of course, we mustn't forget perhaps about the most iconic Škoda of this socialist period, and the Czechs and Slovaks will be able to pull me up on this in the comments. Let me know what you think about the Škoda 105/120 and 130. Little fun fact for you as well, the earlier 105s and 120s with the little round headlights at the front were called Uzholka, which is a nickname for basically a grass snake for some reason, because they were slightly narrow I believe at the front. And the later 130 models with the square headlights at the front were called MKO, or M, because obviously MKO is like a shortcut for an M, which is the name of the chassis they gave these at the time. A hell of a lot of people at the time actually used to call this the Porsche of the Eastern Bloc because of its handling capabilities and similarities to Škoda. As you'll be able to see here, I mean, this one also was rear engine, rear wheel drive, just like a Porsche 911, and apparently had some very good driving capabilities, and because of its weight distribution, it was very successful once again on the racetracks and rally stages of the world. Now, in 1986, of that Turkish rally, the plucky little Škoda with a hell of a lot less power, but also more lightweight, was able to beat the beasts with the names of Peugeot 205 T16 and also Lancia Delta S4, which were absolutely incredible beasts at the time. It, having quadrupled the amount of horsepower that Škoda was able to have, but Škoda still was able to be nimble enough and lightweight enough, and its driving capabilities, with being rear engine, rear wheel drive, they were able to win the Turkish rally. Now, I remember the first car I was ever sat in was in early 1990s, socialist green Škoda Favorit. I still remember the cloth seats. I still remember the sunroof and the rubbery dash they've had, the rubbery gear stick, it was slightly longer, and it used to have these headrests with like a square headrest with a hole in it. Yeah, I used to love that. I just thought that was so funky and such a unique design. Probably not the safest thing though. And I just think it's an absolutely gorgeous car. Like, you might look at it and think this is just an absolute, communist box. But you know, looking at it, it gives me so much nostalgia and so much melancholy. And also, I literally remember how those 1.3 litre carbureted engines, like the one that we had in our one. We had a green one with a little like a rubber spoiler at the back and a little front, like a little front splitter on the front, which is also made out of like a plasticky rubber, which probably did nothing in terms of aerodynamics, but it made the Favorit look a hell of a lot cooler. All right, let me know what you think of Škoda Favorit in the comment section below, and let me know if your parents or yourself in the past have owned any of these old Škodas, because as you would know, obviously the Czechs and Slovaks have got a lot of affinity to Škoda as a brand. Yes, you've noticed right, by the way, the little light has come on because it is bloody getting dark, even though yesterday was such a nice sunny day. Now look, let me know in the comment section below if you would like to see a full-on deep dive on the history of Škoda, maybe, or history of Tatra, or perhaps what the public transportation was like at the time in Czechoslovakia in the 60s, 70s, or even 80s, because yes, some very iconic trams, buses, metros used at the time. Let me know if you would like to see that, and if you maybe let me know also your history with these cars and with some of these iconic Eastern Bloc cars, and maybe if your parents have had them or some grandparents, etc. Let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear your stories. Now obviously in this video I didn't want to go too deep into specific manufacturers or specific engineering of certain cars. I just wanted to cover the surface level of the cars back behind the Iron Curtain and cars that people were able to, you know, essentially buy and what people were allowed to buy. But if you once again would like to see a more deeper video into this, because I understand that not everyone is as passionate about engineering and cars as I am, let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear that. And once again, I would love to hear your stories. Let me know down below. Like the video if you like it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more historical content and also some real life content. I will be visiting these countries in the summer and I will be bringing you also some real life content and more deep dives too. Also, go vote on the channel on the topics that you would like to see. Once again, I put a little post out of a poll of some topic ideas that I've got. And the brutalist architecture of Czechoslovakia Part 2 is coming soon. So stay subscribed. Let me know what you think of this video. And yeah, I'll see you guys later.